Hello, do you like this? How about this? If you do, well then welcome. But if you don't, hopefully this video will still be at least a little bit interesting. I've always liked playing video games, and in the past, I've even tried learning how to make video games, but that never went very well. But this time, I decided to actually commit and to stop messing around and to really try to learn game development, as it's always been an interest and passion of mine. And in the last 2 weeks, I've been learning a game engine called Pico 8, and I wanted to show you what I've done so far in this video. Week 1 was pretty simple, just started off watching a few tutorials on Pico 8 to try and get a hang of things. And speaking of tutorials, I highly recommend the playlist by SpaceCat, since it has a bunch of videos on Pico 8 and it explains everything very well. Anyways, I started off learning how to make a player character and giving it some movement. During this time, I learned a bunch about the main functions of Pico 8, including the init function that runs everything before the game starts, like this code for example, the update function that runs every 30 frames, so every second, and the draw function that draws all the sprites but it runs after the update function, but at the same speed. After this, I quickly finished the player movement and went straight into making my player sprite. Yes, I know it's not that good, but don't mess with my little dino boy. Anyways, after that and doing a bit of debugging, I ended up with this. It may look pretty bad right now, but trust me, I promise it gets better. Hopefully. Next up, I quickly started working on a simple map, so you weren't just moving in a deep, dark void. And after realizing I could make a somewhat looking racetrack thing, I thought, why not give the player a speed boost? Because who doesn't like going fast? I know, I'm pretty awesome, right? Anyways, after playing around with the speed a bit, I decided to continue with my prestigious education, and I learned to add a cool little health bar and have the player lose health as time goes on. I also added this cool little menu and learned to add some collision to certain sprites in the game. After making the health bar, it got me thinking, which is pretty rare for me, but I thought if my health goes down, then I should probably make something that makes it go up.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
I then proceeded to spend the next couple of hours learning to write this code that spawns in food for the player to eat, and when they eat it, they gain health. I know it's pretty impressive, but please hold your applause. After learning the basics of the engine and starting to get the hang of things, I decided to get my hands dirty a bit and start working on my first ever game. I first started working on the player sprite, and the idea for the game was pretty simple. It just builds upon everything I've learned so far. You play as a dinosaur with a health bar that slowly goes down, and you just run around collecting food to restore your health. To put it simply, your goal is to survive for as long as possible. So instead of me talking about the boring stuff, how about we just start the montage? And I already ran into a problem. Basically, I couldn't get the map to load or any sprite to load, even the player. I think I spent a couple of hours just looking through the code trying to figure out what the issue was, and all it was a dumb little underscore missing in front of the draw function.
You serious?
Anyone could have missed that, right? Anyways, let's continue with the montage. Now that's done, this is what the finished game looks like. Like I explained before, you play as this little dinosaur just running around eating food that randomly spawns around the map to restore your health, and you just survive for as long as you can. I added a little feature that has your speed and the rate at which your health drops increase the longer you stay alive, as shown in these clips. I think it adds a bit more fun to the game, since I thought just slowly moving around would be pretty boring. Later, I decided the gameplay is done, but the game itself could use some polishing. So I tried my luck in composing and sound effects for the game, which turned out like this. One more thing I forgot to mention is that I also added a small timer to the top of your screen so you can see how long you've been surviving for. Now, I'm no Beethoven, but you've gotta admit that beat is pretty good. But after making the audio for the game, I decided to update the existing sprites and add some new ones, including making some rocks and giving them collision with the player. And with that, I think that's it for week 1. All in all, I would say it was a very productive week since I got the hang of things in Pico 8 and was able to learn enough to make and finish my very first game. And with that, I think it's finally time for week 2.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
And with that, we're finally in week 2. You would think that my momentum from week 1 would have been carried over, but sadly nope. Between school and maybe a little bit of procrastination, this week was sadly not as eventful as the first. But I pushed through everything, and I wanted to make at least something meaningful, which came out in the form of this Flappy Bird clone, just like every other new game dev does. I continued to follow Space Cat's videos as he showed how to make the game, and you would think that just watching another tutorial wouldn't be as good as doing it myself, but I actually learned a lot from this one. The beginning of the video was pretty simple, just making the sprites, the map, and adding player movement, and getting the tubes to move. He also showed how to get the tubes to delete themselves off screen and come back in different positions, which I thought was pretty cool. And with all of that, it's finally starting to look like that game that everyone destroyed their phones over. The second half of the video just went over adding the score, collision, and creating the menus, including the start game and end game menu. So I started off adding the scoreboard, which surprisingly made this feel more like a game than anything I've added so far, which is pretty nice. And next up, I just added the collision, so you didn't just fly through the pipes. This wasn't super complicated, it was basically just telling the program to stop the player sprite when its X and Y coordinates were the same as the pipes. After that, I tidied up the code a bit to make it a little bit more readable. Then I started working on the menus. The code was basically the same as the collision, I just had to add a game state that would make the game over menu pop up after the player hit the pipe, which then would bring you back to the start menu after pressing the X button. After all that, this was the final product, a fully playable Flappy Bird clone. I think it's safe to say it's a little bit better than my original game. And with that, my 2-week journey of learning game development comes to a close. I have to say, these last 2 weeks have been super fun, and I can't wait to continue with game development, and I highly recommend for anyone who has ever thought about becoming a game dev themselves, that the best advice I could give is to just start. That is what got me going, and it's always the hardest to just start. But with that, I say my goodbyes, and that this is only the beginning. I plan on making more projects, and hopefully, like any other game dev, I hope to make my dream game one day. So, if you want to follow my progress, and any future projects I make, how about you stick around? Thank you, and good night.